It's all Tim's fault.
Yes, and so a few months ago, he said, "Oh, you could give a talk." He's like, "Oh, you could make a calculator quilt." And my first response was, "Oh, that's kind of silly. I don't know about that." But then I just kept having ideas, and it kind of took off in my imagination. And so I went ahead and made my calculator quilt that is up here. And so I just wanted to go through with you real quick how I made it, what the process was. So I'll go ahead and get started. So how to make a quilt. It's mostly math. So the first step is planning the quilt. And for this quilt, what I did is I just used graph paper and sketched it out. And I went through several different formats. At first, I wanted to just do a generic calculator. And I realized pretty quickly that there really is no such thing as one generic calculator. And so I looked at a lot of different HP calculators, and none of them really quite fit until I looked at the 42S. So that's what this quilt is loosely based on. And the reason why I ended up patterning after that is I was specifically looking for something that lined up really nicely this way and that way, because I didn't want to deal with things not being in perfect line, because that would have just made it a lot more complicated. So the next part is I choose the colors, and I wanted to choose some bright colors that weren't too girly, so that's why it's green and blue. You notice they also are my favorite colors. It's on my wedding ring too. But and then the next part.
What algorithm did you use in that choice?
What's that?
What algorithm did you use?
Choosing. Yeah.
PDQ.
So then when I went, the next part is I sat down and figured out what all the pieces would need to be in the quilt. And since it was on graph paper, that part was actually pretty easy. And then I calculated how much fabric I needed to buy of each color. And I actually have the sheet I used right here. So you see I have all the fabrics written out, and then how many pieces of each fabric, and then how many inches of fabric I would need to buy to do that many pieces. And that's pretty loose. It's not exact, just because I always count on making some mistakes or the fabric not being perfectly square or something like that. But the next part is picking out the fabric. I actually went to one quilt store. When we lived in Utah, like crafting is kind of a big thing here, but in Colorado it's not such a big thing, and quilting is kind of something that older ladies do, no offense. And so I went into this one quilt store, and they kind of looked at my little plan. They're like, "Oh, you made a plan, how nice." But I did.
How many quilts have you made now?
I don't know, like 10 maybe.
Oh wow.
But
You have 10 plans?
no, yeah. I usually, a lot of people don't really like the whole planning out of the layout of the quilt, but that's my favorite part, so I usually plan my own. So I picked out the fabric. I actually spent an hour at the fabric store just comparing different fabrics, because I get kind of picky. The next part is cutting out the pieces, and that's actually the part where you have to be really, really precise, because when you make errors in cutting, your blocks don't line up. So if you look really closely at the quilt, you can see, like right here, it's not quite in line, and right there it's not quite in line, and that's because my seam allowance was just a tiny bit smaller, and so the different rows, these rows are just a little bit longer than the ones that have the longer cuts. But I feel like this is actually pretty good for me. I've made some of my earlier quilts, some of my rows were almost like 2 inches off. I get to look at those ones. Yeah. But you have to be really, really careful. Then I did apply the applique, that's all the numbers. So to get the numbers on there, I printed it out on a piece of paper, then I traced it onto a fusible fabric, then I ironed that onto the number fabric, and then I cut that out, and then ironed that onto the blocks and then stitched it around. So it's, Tim kept bugging me saying I should put text on all of the blocks.
No, we like these user-definable.
Yeah. But it would have taken forever to do that, so I wanted to keep it pretty simple.
Keyboard wars at home on this?
Well, I do object. That's not the official HP font. I know that.
You know, I
That
do
is
wish I had
fine.
paid more attention to the font. I didn't realize until afterwards just how much the font I used would make a difference. So.
I think you could Velcro words on there.
Just put a bunch of Velcro blocks. That's great. So then I started putting it together. In this one I did these rows first, and then I put it from top to bottom, and then I did the borders. And that's a picture of it after all the pieces, after that, just the central piece was put together. And Tim wanted me to put that one. Whenever I get out the camera, my kids think that I need to take pictures of them. So they're in a lot of pictures. But and then I basted the quilt. So a quilt has 3 layers. It has the front layer, the middle layer, and the back. And to do that, I pinned a sheet on the wall, and then I pinned the backing on the wall, and then I sprayed it with a spray baster, and then put the batting on, and it just kind of sticks on there, and then I put the front on, and that really made it nice and smooth. And the next part is the actual quilting. That's what makes a quilt. A quilt is that it has 3 layers sewed together, and so when you are quilting, that is the process of actually sewing those layers together. And so on this quilt, see all the boxes are outlined. If you look on the back, and you can see a little bit better where that quilting is. And then I bind the edges, and that's kind of a long, complicated process that you probably don't want to hear about. But that's my quilt.
How long did it take?
It's hard to say. Probably was over a couple of months of my free time. Probably if I sat down and just worked on it, it would probably take like 3 days maybe. But
Was this presentation under the NDA?
no, you're free to tell everyone you want about this.
And is all the stitching done by machine, or is some of the binding done by hand?
I did all of it by machine. Yeah.
And what are the washing instructions?
I
Don't. There'll be
Only
memory
wash
loss.
it if well, it should be fine if you need to wash it. Just every time you wash it, it's going to wear out a little bit more. But it is a door prize. So.
Ooh.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, question.
Does this mean that whoever wins that will be able to write more tightly knit code?
You must get up and leave.
I do have, my one request is that whoever gets it, I will want a good picture of it.